You know that feeling, when even your own family looks at you like you're the embarrassment they have to tolerate? I lived that moment the day I walked into court. My parents, Helena and Robert Vance, didn't even try to hide their disgust. They rolled their eyes like I was some drama they were forced to attend, not their daughter seeking justice. They came to protect Julian Thorne, the man they adored as the perfect son, the charming golden boy who had stolen everything from me. I stood there, hands cold but steady, watching them sit beside him as if I were the intruder. But when Judge Wilkins called my name, something changed. He froze the second I started speaking, not because I was emotional, but because I was prepared. My parents never believed I had it in me. They thought I'd crumble, cry, or beg. That's what I used to do. Until I learned how deeply they had betrayed me. The trust fund my grandmother left for me, the only piece of security I had, was gone. They'd handed it to Julian under the excuse of investing wisely. When I found out the money had disappeared, they told me to stop overreacting and be more responsible. It wasn't just Julian who had lied. It was them. They'd rather protect their image and their favorite man than their own daughter. So I stayed quiet and pretended to be broken while I gathered everything I needed. I found forged documents, false accounts, and payments that linked all three of them. Every lie they built, I traced. Every excuse they gave, I dismantled. That day in court wasn't about tears or pain. It was about truth. I presented evidence, spoke calmly, and watched their faces lose all color. For once, they couldn't interrupt me. They couldn't silence me. The courtroom went quiet when I finished. The judge denied their motion to dismiss and called their actions a calculated betrayal. My parents couldn't even look at me. I walked out knowing I had already won. Not the case yet, but something far greater. I won my voice back, and for the first time, they finally saw who I truly was. I grew up hearing that I was too delicate, the kind of girl who needed guidance for every step. My parents liked reminding me of that, especially when Julian was around. He wasn't related to us, but they treated him like he belonged more than I ever did. He had an easy smile, spoke confidently, and always seemed to know what to say to make people trust him. My parents ate it up. They loved how polished he looked beside them, how he handled money talks with my dad, and how he made my mom feel important with simple compliments. Whenever he visited, the whole house shifted around him. My mother baked his favorite desserts, my father asked for his opinion on everything, and I became invisible. It didn't bother them that he wasn't family. They liked the version of themselves they saw through him. I was just the quiet daughter in the background. When my grandmother passed away, she left me a small inheritance meant to give me a safe start in life. I thought it would be something I could rely on when I turned 22. But before the money was even in my hands, my parents pushed the idea that Julian should handle it. They spoke as if it was the most obvious choice in the world. He knows finance, they said. He'll make sure it grows. I didn't want to upset anyone, and I trusted that my parents meant well. Julian acted like he was doing me a huge favor, explaining things in a way that made me feel even smaller. I didn't understand much, but I also didn't want to look clueless. So when they gave me documents to sign during a family gathering, I didn't question anything. I didn't ask for time. I didn't even read the fine print. I just signed and tried to smile like everyone expected. Looking back, it feels strange how normal that moment seemed. Music was playing, people were laughing, and I was handing over control of something important without realizing what it meant. Nobody warned me. Nobody told me to take a second look. They only cared that Julian approved. That signature changed everything. I didn't know it then, but I had stepped into a situation where trust would be used against me, and where the people who were supposed to protect me had already chosen someone else's side. 2 months before I turned 22, I decided to check how my inheritance was doing. I thought it would be simple. Just ask Julian for an update and get a clear answer. Instead, he dodged every question. He kept saying he was busy, or that he would send the details later. Each time, something felt off, but I tried to stay patient. When I mentioned it to my parents, they immediately defended him. They said I was being pushy and should let him handle things in peace. Their tone made it clear that questioning him was a problem, not his silence. But I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling anymore, so I kept asking. Finally, Julian sent a short email. There was no apology, no explanation, just a flat message saying the money had been moved into a high-risk investment that completely failed. My entire inheritance was gone. $187,000 disappeared without warning, without permission, and without any real explanation. I sat there staring at the screen, numb. It didn't feel real. That money wasn't a luxury. It was supposed to give me a foundation when I stepped into adulthood. It was the last thing my grandmother left for me. The thought that it was wiped out so carelessly made my stomach twist. When I told my parents, I hoped they would stand with me. I expected concern, anger, or even shock. Instead, they acted like it was a minor setback. They said they were disappointed in him, but then quickly brushed it aside. They insisted that losses happen and told me not to make a big deal out of it. My mother tried to convince me I should have asked Julian for updates more often, while my father said I needed to learn to be more cautious in life. Not once did they ask how I was feeling. Not once did they question why Julian had made decisions without my approval. Their focus was keeping the peace, not holding him accountable. They worried more about upsetting him than about the fact that my future had been wiped clean without my consent. It was the first time I realized how alone I truly was in this situation. The people I expected to protect me seemed more concerned with avoiding conflict than standing up for what was right. That silence from them hurt more than the loss itself, because it showed me exactly where I stood in their priorities. When everything fell apart, I realized I had to change the way I handled things. My parents already believed I couldn't manage anything on my own, so I let them keep thinking that. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, and didn't show them what I was planning. On the outside, I looked shaken and confused, the daughter who never understood how the world worked. But once I was alone, the tears stopped. I finally understood that if I wanted answers, I would have to get them myself. I found a job in a small law office that dealt with tough cases most people avoided. The place wasn't fancy, but it gave me something I desperately needed: distance from my family's influence and access to real information. No one there knew my last name or cared about my background. I was simply another worker trying to do her job. During breaks and late evenings, I stayed at my desk and read everything I could find. I learned how people are supposed to handle someone else's money. I read about duties, contracts, and what counts as proof when someone lies or takes what isn't theirs. At first it was overwhelming, but slowly the pieces started making sense. I began to understand just how many rules Julian ignored and how many steps he skipped when he touched my inheritance. I needed more than theory, though. I needed facts, hard evidence no one could twist or explain away. So I started gathering documents one by one. I requested old records that I legally had a right to see. I checked emails, old statements, and anything linked to the trust. At home, I searched through files my parents kept on the family computer, pretending I was helping with something simple whenever they were around. What I found wasn't obvious at first. It was small details tucked between pages, inconsistencies in numbers, and signatures that looked slightly off. But the more I put the clues together, the clearer the picture became. Julian hadn't just made a mistake, he had moved things around deliberately. The trust money didn't vanish by accident. It had been redirected in ways meant to stay hidden, as if he assumed no one would look closely. Every discovery gave me a little more clarity and a little more strength. I wasn't helpless, and I wasn't confused. I was preparing for a day when the truth would matter more than their explanations. By the time I finished gathering everything, I wasn't the weak daughter they thought I was. I was someone ready to take the next step without their approval or support. While searching for answers, I never expected the most important clue to be hidden in something as simple as an old desk. It belonged to my grandfather, and no one had touched it since he passed away. The drawers were stiff, the papers inside covered with dust, and most of the items looked like they hadn't been moved in years. But I remembered Julian using that desk when he stayed at our house for a few weeks, treating it like his personal office. That memory pushed me to look a little closer. Inside one of the drawers, under a stack of envelopes, I found a carbon copy checkbook. At first, I thought it had nothing to do with my situation. The pages were faint, almost unreadable, but the impressions caught my eye. When I held the paper at an angle, I noticed the outlines of amounts and names pressed into the surface. They weren't random. They were too neatly lined up, too purposeful. The first name that appeared was Thorn Living, LLC. I had never heard of it before. It didn't sound like an investment group or a trust service. The second name was related to my father's golf club. The checks weren't large enough to look suspicious on their own, but they didn't match anything connected to my inheritance. Something felt off, so I wrote down every detail and started digging. With every search, pieces began fitting together. Thorn Living wasn't a business that handled funds. It was the name of the company Julian used to pay for his high-end apartment. The rent was more than most people made in a month. Suddenly, the missing money didn't seem like a vanished investment. It looked like a personal expense disguised behind paperwork no one was meant to question. Then I looked into the payments linked to my father's club. The dates lined up perfectly with the time he showed off a new boat he claimed he saved up for. The numbers didn't lie. The funds moved out of my trust matched the costs of things that had nothing to do with me or any investment at all. They were luxuries, paid for with money that wasn't theirs to touch. The discovery hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't only Julian who had misused what was left for my future. My parents weren't innocent bystanders trying to keep peace. They had benefited directly. Their silence made sense now. Their quick excuses, their defense of Julian, their attempts to convince me to drop everything, it all pointed to one truth. They all had something to lose if the truth came out. Finding that checkbook changed everything. It showed me that what happened wasn't a single act of dishonesty. It was a planned effort involving the very people who should have protected me. And from that moment on, I knew the path ahead wouldn't just be about confronting Julian, it would be about facing all three of them with the truth they hoped I'd never uncover. I decided to speak to my parents one more time before taking any bigger step. I wasn't sure what their reaction would be, but I hoped they would at least listen. I didn't show them the documents I had collected. Instead, I approached them as if I still needed their help, hoping to see whether they cared enough to stand with me without being pushed by proof. I tried to keep my voice steady while explaining that I wanted the situation fixed and that Julian needed to return what he had taken. My mother's reaction told me everything. She didn't look shocked or worried. She simply sighed, like I was causing unnecessary stress. She acted as if the whole thing was a minor inconvenience rather than a serious wrong. She told me everyone faces financial setbacks and suggested that pursuing anything further would only create problems. She made it sound like the issue wasn't the loss itself, but the trouble I might create by demanding answers. My father sat quietly, avoiding my eyes the entire time. When he finally spoke, his tone was soft but distant. He told me to drop it and insisted that trying to fix things through legal channels would only harm relationships and damage the family's reputation. He didn't ask about the details, didn't question Julian's actions, and didn't show any interest in understanding my side. His only concern was keeping everything quiet. They even offered to help me by giving me a small monthly amount, as if that could replace what had been taken or erase the betrayal. The offer felt less like support and more like a way to make me stay silent. They didn't ask what I had discovered or how I had been affected. They simply wanted the situation to disappear without creating waves. In that moment, I realized they weren't neutral. They had already made their choice long before I walked in. Their loyalty was tied to appearances and comfort, not fairness. It became clear that they saw Julian as someone worth protecting, even at my expense. Their refusal to acknowledge what happened showed me that they were more worried about what others might think than what I had lost. Walking away from that conversation, something inside me shifted. I no longer felt confused or hopeful. The mask I had worn around them slipped off for good. I finally understood that expecting them to choose me was pointless. They preferred convenience over truth, and keeping Julian close mattered more to them than standing by their own daughter. That clarity made the next step easier, because I knew I would have to move forward without their support. After realizing I couldn't rely on my parents, I knew I had to move forward on my own. I gathered every document I had collected. Copies, notes, timelines, and everything else I thought might matter. I organized it carefully, making sure each piece connected clearly. Once I felt confident I had enough to take the next step, I searched for someone who could guide me through the legal path. That's when I found Miranda Croft, a lawyer known for taking on difficult cases without backing down. Meeting her for the first time was intimidating, but I told her everything clearly and calmly. I didn't exaggerate or try to earn sympathy. I simply laid out what I had discovered. She listened closely, flipping through the pages with sharp attention. When she finally spoke, she said the evidence showed patterns that couldn't be ignored. That was the first time someone outside my situation understood the seriousness of what had happened. Hiring her wasn't easy. Her fees were far more than I could afford alone. I used my savings from work and asked a cousin I trusted for help. It wasn't comfortable to admit I needed financial support, but I knew it was the only way forward. Once the payments were made, Miranda started examining the case from the ground up. She checked every detail, filled in any gaps, and guided me to gather additional documents that would strengthen our claims. As we worked together, she explained which laws applied to my situation and how each part of the case connected. She told me that what happened wasn't a mistake. It involved violations that carried serious consequences. She recommended filing claims that held everyone involved accountable, not just Julian. Her approach was direct and structured. She didn't soften her words or hold back, and that honesty helped me stay focused. When the case was ready, she prepared to file it with multiple claims, each one addressing a different part of the wrongdoing. The documents named Julian first, but they also included my parents for knowingly benefiting from the money that had been moved without my permission. It wasn't about anger or revenge anymore. It was about confronting the truth and making sure the people responsible were held to the same standards anyone else would face. Seeing everything written clearly in legal form gave me a sense of strength I hadn't felt before. The case wasn't just a collection of papers. It was proof that I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't overreacting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken back control of my own story. On the day of the preliminary hearing, I woke up with a strange calmness. I didn't choose anything fancy to wear. I kept my outfit simple because I wanted every focus to be on the facts, not on how I looked. When I arrived at the courthouse, the halls felt colder than I expected, but I kept walking until I reached the assigned room. I took slow breaths, reminding myself that I had prepared for this moment. When I stepped inside, the first thing I saw was my parents sitting behind Julian. They weren't nervous or unsure. They looked irritated, almost bored, as if they were forced to watch something beneath them. Their eyes moved to me, and both of them reacted the same way. A tired eye roll, the kind people give when they're disappointed before hearing a single word. It wasn't anger or confusion. It was dismissal. That look told me more than any argument we had ever had. They hadn't come to support me. They were there to show loyalty to him. Julian glanced back at me with a half-smile that wasn't friendly. It was the kind of expression someone wears when they think they've already won. Seeing them together like that made everything clear. Whatever bond my parents felt with him was stronger than any connection they felt with me. I didn't let myself stare for long. I walked to my seat beside Miranda, keeping my expression steady. When the judge entered, the room settled. Julian's attorney stood first, confident and loud, speaking as if he expected the hearing to end quickly. He described everything as a harmless mix-up within a family. He said the case didn't belong in court, and that the whole situation amounted to confusion, not wrongdoing. His tone suggested that involving the legal system was unnecessary and dramatic. Listening to him, I didn't feel intimidated. I felt more certain of why I was there. His words weren't about truth. They were an attempt to push the situation back into silence, the same silence my parents preferred. While he spoke, Julian sat relaxed, and my parents nodded along, as if everything he said made perfect sense. Their confidence came from the belief that no one would ever question them. The judge eventually turned his attention toward us, waiting for the response. The room felt tense, but I knew this was exactly the moment I had prepared for. Everything I had uncovered, everything I had worked for, was about to be brought into the open, no matter who tried to ignore it. When the attorney finished speaking, the judge shifted his attention toward me. His expression was calm, but serious. He asked if I wished to add anything, giving me the chance to speak for myself. For a moment, the room felt completely still. I could feel my parents staring, expecting me to break down the way I used to when things became overwhelming. But I wasn't the same person they remembered. I stood up slowly, making sure my hands were steady. I kept my posture firm and focused on the judge, not on the people behind me. My voice didn't shake. I addressed him respectfully and went straight to the information that mattered. Instead of explaining my emotions or trying to gain sympathy, I referred to the exact documents we had prepared. I pointed out the specific pages that showed signatures that didn't match mine, and financial transfers that had no approval attached to them. As I spoke, I saw the judge lean in slightly, paying close attention. He followed along with the files in front of him while I explained each part clearly. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I laid out how the money had moved, who had benefited, and how the actions connected. It wasn't a story. It was a breakdown of events supported by clear evidence. While focusing on the facts, I didn't turn around to see my parents' reactions, but I could sense something changing behind me. Their confidence had been built on the belief that I couldn't articulate anything without falling apart. They thought I didn't understand what had happened or how to defend myself. Hearing me speak calmly, outlining every detail, shattered that image. Julian, who had been relaxed a moment earlier, no longer looked amused. The shift in his posture was obvious. He wasn't leaning back anymore. He wasn't smiling. He seemed to realize that what we presented wasn't something he could brush off with charm or excuses. The judge paused after I finished. He reviewed the papers again, his face more serious than before. It was clear he wasn't seeing this as a simple disagreement. He understood it was far more deliberate than the defense had suggested. The silence in the room felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable for me. It felt like the truth was finally being heard without interruptions. When the judge finally spoke, his tone had changed. He acknowledged the weight of the evidence and made it clear that the matter required further examination. In that moment, I knew the balance had shifted. I had walked into the courtroom underestimated, but for the first time, everyone there had to see me as someone who knew exactly what she was doing. When the judge gave his decision, the room felt different. His tone was firm, leaving no doubt that he had taken the matter seriously. He stated that there was enough information to continue, and that the issues raised needed to be examined in a full trial. Hearing those words lifted a weight off my shoulders. It meant the truth wouldn't be brushed aside or treated like a small misunderstanding. It meant everything I had uncovered would finally be brought into the open. I didn't turn around to see my parents or Julian. I didn't need to. The stillness behind me said enough. The confidence they carried into the courtroom had disappeared. They had expected a quick ending, something wrapped up quietly so they could go back to their usual lives. Instead, they were facing the reality they had tried so hard to avoid. As I walked out, I felt no need to have the last word or make any dramatic statement. Their silence was louder than anything I could have said. For years, they had treated me like someone who couldn't handle responsibility or understand what was happening around her. Now they were forced to face a version of me they never believed existed. Someone who could stand up for herself without asking for permission. Outside the courthouse, the air felt clearer. The case wasn't over, but the hardest part was behind me. I had taken a step I once thought I'd never be brave enough to take. I didn't check my phone or wait for any message from them. I had already changed my number earlier that morning. Breaking that link was part of my choice to move forward without their shadow hanging over me. Losing the inheritance hurt, but the experience changed something more important inside me. I learned how much strength I had when I stopped depending on people who never saw my worth. I learned that staying quiet only benefits those who want to control the story. Speaking up showed me that my voice carried more weight than I ever realized. Walking away from the courthouse wasn't just leaving a building. It felt like stepping out of a life where I had been forced into the background. I finally understood that even without the money, I had gained something far better. The ability to rebuild my future on my own terms, without anyone deciding for me. I still wonder if walking away was the only choice I had, or if I should have tried one more time. Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like mine, subscribe and turn on notifications.